So basically, as I understand it, this all started out in a village in Madagascar, and there was a French Jesuit missionary who was there for a 7-year mission to, convert the savages, basically. And he, at the end of his mission, had a chat with Jesus about, what he'd done there in his time, and call it what you want to call it, a moment of introspection, deep sort of contemplation. And the insight he got, Jesus had said that, buddy, you haven't really helped these people out at all. Their lives are in no manner better than they were when you came here 7 years ago. And he was like, that's actually true. I haven't really had any positive, meaningful impact in this village. And so he went down to the village and said, is there anything I can do to help? And they said, well, actually, this Jesus guy sounds great, and the wines and the fishes and everything else, love is great, but what we're struggling with is we have this dry period when we don't have enough food for our children, and there's a couple months of the year when our children are starving, and if you could help us with that, then we might have a little bit of time to contemplate the greater, purpose of life. And he's like, well, that sounds reasonable. But I don't really know how to help you with this. And so what I said, let me see what I can do. And so he decided not to go back to France. He decided to stay and see if he could work and help. And I don't know exactly how long, but traveled around the island of Madagascar and went from village to village and started to ask questions and said, how do you do things? How do you do things? What's going on here? And really deeply listen and watch and sort of attempt to integrate insight from the broader community. And after coming up with what he thought were some pertinent insights, came back to the village and said, I think I've got something for you here. And so, as I understand it, the basic dynamics that were going on is that rice is the staple crop in Madagascar, and the way that the farmers were producing it was they would start it off in a like a seedling area, like a it's sort of a protected area where they would start the seedlings in the ground, but in close proximity. So, lots of seedlings in close proximity. They put them in there, start them, and after about 6 weeks of age, they dig them up, bring them out to the field, and plant them 2 or 3 plants per clump every 4 inches or something like that. So you can imagine, 2 plants, 3 plants. There's about whatever that is, 25 or 30 plants per square foot. So a pretty significant population density. And what this guy said was, actually, let's just do an experiment here. What I'm suggesting is you put them in 1 plant every foot. So, instead of having 2, there's 1, 1. So, many fewer plants, and we'll put them in at 2 weeks old instead of 6 weeks old. So, effectively, much smaller, much farther apart. And they're like, if this is how practical he is, then the Jesus guy is definitely we really shouldn't trust him on that one either. But what happens is, as we'll begin to look at with these seedlings, and we'll look at outside with the squash and things like that, as we were talking about, the plants early in their life read the environment and make decisions about how to build their body based on the environmental conditions they experience early in their life, because it's not natural for plants to get dug up and moved. And so, the genetic sort of history of plants is you're stuck with what you started with. And so when you leave the seedlings in the cultivation area, young for 6 weeks with lots of other plants in close proximity, they basically are expecting to have this much space to work with. And so they'll send up 1 or 2, what's called a tiller, the stem with the grain on it. And so you can do the math on how many plants there are per square foot and how many tillers that would be. And that's the normal yield. what happens when you put the seedlings in when they're 2 weeks old, they just barely germinated. As if they haven't reached an edge, if their roots haven't reached an edge, they still imagine that they have the potential to realize their full inherent genetic potential. And so when you put them in 1 foot apart, 2 weeks old, they reach out with their roots. They reach out further with their roots. They reach even further out with their roots, and they're like, oh, this time I can go for it. Remember the pigweed that germinates at 6 in the fall and it's 6 inches tall and goes to seed, versus the one that germinates in the spring and it gets to be 6 feet tall? So they'll have 150 tillers per plant, or 200 tillers per plant, or 250 tillers per plant. The global record yield for rice, kilograms per hectare, is an SRI plot. Like the most ever recorded by any research institution anywhere on the planet. The global record for potatoes, more kilograms per hectare for like yield, is an SCI plot. Putting plants in younger, further apart, allowing them to realize their inherent genetic potential, actually profoundly benefits yield. So what's going on in these villages all across the world, I know about it, specifically, there was a guy who's a emeritus professor at Cornell University, which is one of the sort of more universities with high reputation in the US. His name is Norman Uphoff, and he's been helping to sort of informally collect newspaper reports from various countries, various villages in various countries in different languages, and sort of establish this informal network of like documentation, because it's all happening totally grassroots, word of mouth. But in many cases, sort of, women in their small plots, because they're able to double, and the average increase in yield is between a doubling and a quadrupling. So when they're able to have this profound increase in food production, they not only have enough to feed their children, but they have enough to sell extra. And then when they're growing it and they're selling it, they're keeping the money. And that's completely shifting the power politics in the between the genders in the villages. And like I said before, the impacts on misogyny, which if people have been to some traditional, whatever, what's the word for developing world villages, if anybody's ever been, sometimes the gender relations are not healthy. Let's just say it that way, to be polite. So really, really exciting dynamics occurring where, malnutrition is being reversed, equality is being facilitated, yields are being increased. It's really, really exciting. But the basic concept here is that the plants have a inherent genetic potential, and the things that we do to them early in their life are profoundly traumatic in many cases. And so if we can begin to look at it and think of it, and shift those practices, I propose that people will experience dramatic improvements in yield just from doing some of these basic things. So we can just look. So there's a couple basic principles. One of them is you want the roots always to be bigger than the top. There's this thing called, there's cytokinins and auxins, which are plant growth hormones, and some are made by the leaf and some are made by the root. And when the root growth is inhibited, then those growth hormones can't be released, and so the top growth hormones are still happening, and effectively the plants will start to get leggy, and you're basically setting in hormone imbalance then at this very early stage in the plant, which is very difficult to reverse. There are some families of plants which are extremely pissy about this, and brassicas is one of those families. So brassicas is the cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli and kale and things like that. So, one of my experiences is if you leave your broccolis or or cabbages in the seedling tray for too long, they'll never get a big head. If anybody's ever tried that, like you put the broccoli in and it ends up growing into a decent sized plant, but that head just never actually fills out to a decent sized head. In many cases, that's simply because it spent too long in the seedling tray. The plant should never reach, the roots should never reach an edge. The top should never be as big as the bottom. These are some basic rules of thumb. So I personally am pretty much completely opposed to these things I call cell trays, because while I understand that they help turn your production operation into an efficient factory style operation, you're dealing with living beings, and the effect of what you're doing to them is like that example of the boy who was born at the end of the Soviet Union and spent his first 5 years in a crib. You're profoundly disturbing these sentient beings for the rest of their lives in your attempt to be efficient and productive. So I know there's lots of people out there teaching courses and selling products, and we're all trained to buy stuff as part of being successful by the system that we're raised in. I invite people to consider if they've ever seen a tomato germinate in the ground and have ever let it be, and see what happens to it 3 months later. Does anybody ever had that experience?
Yes.
Of a tomato?
This summer, the plant of the tomatoes just pop up, and I'm still harvesting from it. It gives, I think, 30 kilos of tomatoes just from one plant, and it's probably on like 2 square meters now.
My experience with if you start tomatoes, and people will start tomatoes, I say, imagine it's a competition. Nature's like, go for it. Take a 6 weeks, head start. Do the best you can. Buy the best seed you can buy. Buy the best potting soil you can buy. Buy the best tray you can buy. Start 6 weeks ahead. Go for it. That's what we do. We start our tomatoes in March, end of February, beginning of March, maybe beginning of April. You can't put them in the ground till the middle of May. They're these tall seedlings with little root balls. You stick them in the ground. They might squeeze out, a few pounds of fruit. Nature's like, yeah, middle of May, all right, starting to get ready. Watch this. Germinates a tiny little tomato seedling, right? All of a sudden, 2.5 months later, in my experience, it's a good solid, 3 meters across, green leaves from bottom to top, loaded with fruit, completely keeps on yielding until the frost. If you've ever seen that happen, right? If you've ever seen that happen, you're like, okay, nature, score 1 for you. You won this year. I'm going to do better next year. And you go right back to buying seed, buying potting soil, putting it in trays, getting it under lights, taking your 6 weeks head start, right? How many years in a row do you need to get your ass handed to you by nature for you to realize that maybe you could just start working with her? Let those tomatoes that fell on the ground germinate where they want to germinate, and just don't pull them out. Like, how much work is involved? Maybe you want to put some mulch down around them, so when they start going horizontal, like, there's no tying, there's no pruning. I mean, the amount of effort that we engage in growing food because we're taught to do these things is completely preposterous. And part of the way that I've gotten to be able to make my living working 20 hours a week farming is letting nature do as much of the work as possible, and not thinking that I know better, and not spending money on things that people told me I needed to buy after I watched nature kick my ass, if I can use the vulgarities and you aren't too offended. I've been trying to use not the full vulgarities, but the sort of half vulgarities. So yeah, does that all kind of make sense? People, I mean, is there any pushback or any questions you want to engage, or
If I can be the
devil's advocate?
Yes.
Let her go first.
So, the second.
Bring it on, yeah, in a minute.
But so you would say you see, okay, you let maybe rotten tomatoes then regrow from being there, but also seed directly, so not seed in trays.
I'm saying if you want to start seeds in trays, let the roots never reach an edge, and ensure that the top is never bigger than the bottom.
Yeah.
There's some basic rules. And I would suggest the food that the babies eat between birth and kindergarten, I think of kindergarten as the first time they go off on the bus to go to school, which would be when you put them in the ground, make sure the food they're eating in that early childhood development stage is of optimal nutrition. We can go look at that bag over there, which is professional, organic potting soil, and see the ingredient list. It is not a pretty ingredient list. It's basically organic macaroni and cheese, right? It is not a balanced diet. It's NPK with cocoa coir and peat moss. Cocoa coir and peat moss are a substrate that the roots can live in, and the NPK is the soluble nutrient drip that gets injected into the bloodstream that short circuits the digestive tract. So that may be certified organic potting soil or whatever you want to call it. But if we understand the importance of early childhood development and nutrition in that phase of life, please make sure that the thing you're using to start the seedlings in is a comprehensive biological, minerally diverse matrix. So I've got a couple of slides here that potting soil is the next slide after seed, where we talk about that. And so I'm not saying thou shalt not start seeds inside. I'm saying if you're going to do it, try not to traumatize these children too much before they get access to nature. Yeah.
So you heard about Ernst Gotch and syntropic
Yeah.
farming. I'm sure many of you also heard.
Yeah.
But actually, and I'm not here saying that anybody is right or wrong. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
just putting the idea.
Please throw it on the table.
Okay. So I've worked with Ernst many years, and the principle for syntropic farming is completely the opposite of having more space and less seeds and less plants.
Yeah.
It's completely the opposite. It's having much more seeds and much more plants in the same space. So in one line you have 5, 10, 15 different species of annual and perennial and different, yes.
Yep.
And trees and annuals and perennials and herbs and everything in the same zone.
Yep.
So just putting the
So when I put my tomato plants in, I put them in. There's going to be one plant here, and one plant here, and one plant here. And when I put them in, they're this big. So there's going to be a bunch of time between when I put them in and when they're going to be reaching out all over the place. And when I put my kale plants in, I put in one right here, and one right here, and one right here, or maybe over here. So, and they're again very small. So I will always put a row or two of beets or carrots in between my kale plants. There's space for radishes, there's space for lettuces, right? There's a time between when the tomato plant goes in and when everything else, and when that tomato plant's going to be reaching all over the place. So I'm completely in favor of polycultures. There was this thing called biointensive mini gardening, John Jevons. Anybody's heard of John Jevons? And there's a big thing at UC Santa Cruz in California, and he was a big sort of leader in the 70s and teacher and things. Yeah, and the whole thing there was like optimize, get these plants in as close as possible, and that's going to be maximizing yield. So what I propose is that no one listens to me or Ernst, but you experiment. That you let nature show you and what the potentials are. I'd like to say, has anybody ever seen an eggplant that was 7 feet tall? Anybody? Have you seen a pepper plant that was the size of a Christmas tree? When you see an eggplant that's 7 feet tall, and when you see a pepper plant that's the size of a Christmas tree, you'll begin to envision what the potential of a pepper plant is, and you'll begin to give them the space necessary for them to realize that potential. There's a book, another one of the books that's in the library is called How to Grow World Record Tomatoes, and it's by this redneck country boy from down south Alabama. He's literally in the Guinness Book of World Records, and it's a picture book. And he shows you the seeds. He's like, these are the fat seeds, these are the flat seeds. Never use the flat seeds, always use the fat seeds. He shows you the seedlings when he's putting them in the ground. And he's got a big root ball, and he literally takes off every single leaf except the top just barely coming out ones. And you see the front cover is the 4 tomato plants that are 8 meters tall, 26 to 28 feet, 9 meters ish. It's 1,320 pounds of fruit out of the 4 plants, which is 330 140 pounds per plant average. What's that in kilograms? That's like 140 kilograms of fruit per plant. So it's a great, that's like whatever. He was a country boy. He was experimenting. He's like, I want to figure out how to grow really good tomatoes. And he didn't, go to the university or anything else. He just experimented. Try this, try that, etc. So, John Kempf did this research with an Amish farmer a number of years ago. He told me about it, where they did eggplants, and the normal planting was in a bed. There'd be 2 rows of eggplants, 18 inches on center, so a foot and a half, 50 centimeters. So that was a normal planting, and then the second bed was 2 rows, but they were 36 inches on center, so 1 meter between the plants. And then the third bed was 1 row, 1 meter between the plants. And the total yield in bed 1, if that was X, whatever that total was, the total yield in bed 2 was 2X, and the total yield in bed 3 was 4X. So if there's 4 times as many plants in the first bed as there are in the third bed, that means the plants in the third bed were yielding 16 times as much fruit as the plants in the first bed. So I've got all kinds of experiences I can refer you to and picture books, and I refer you primarily to SRI with global record yields as CSIRO. What's that institution? CSIRO. It's like a UN thing, that global, I think maybe the French run it. It's a well-recognized global ag research institute. This is all stuff that's been documented. So if yield is a consideration, for the time being, most farmers get paid based on the quantity of food they're producing. We had questions yesterday about, is this possible? Can we feed 8 billion people? Can we feed 10 billion people? I would suggest that there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle here that we can investigate, experiment with, that would provide that vision and possibility. So yeah, eggplants, I mean, yeah, I got so many stories. I feel like I'm wasting all my time. I don't need to tell you more stories. I think I've conveyed the basic principle. So if I, pull this seedling up, I was saying yesterday, one of the things that's really important to me is never to grab a stem. The act of grabbing a stem, you can actually see 3 months later in the plant. You'll see this woody, it'll be pinched. Anybody ever seen that at the bottom of a kale plant or the bottom of another plant? It's small, and it's like woody. The rest of the stem has got it's like a green or a purple color, but underneath it's like woody and pinched. Literally the act of grabbing the plant and pulling it up, it's like take a little, I don't know, a baby, and just grab it by the neck and pick it up by the neck. Think of these as sentient beings. Think of each one of these, this is a sentient being. Well, I would never use this thing in the first place. What I'd use is an open tray, and I'd reach my hand down to the edge of the open tray, and I pick up a handful, and then I lightly take the plant out from below and place it in the ground. For me, the transplanting phase, the act of getting the plant into the ground, these are my 3-year-olds, my 4-year-olds, my 5-year-old children. Anybody ever had children? They're still pretty delicate bound then in that age, right? You gotta just be a little bit gentle with them. Think about, these are sentient beings. We'll talk about seed starting and prayer and intention in the next workshop. The psychic, the energetic, the consciousness aspect. Right now we're just talking about physical plane stuff. But yeah, so for me, you basically aren't doing anything after you put the plants in the ground except picking. Once the plants are in the ground, you got the drip tape down, you got the mulch down, you really don't have to do anything until it's time to pick. So take some time, be gentle, be sensitive, be thoughtful, engage that process with utmost care and attentiveness.
So can we see what perfect size? What is the perfect size?
What's the perfect
for
size?
plant?
2 weeks,
Hã?
not more than 2 weeks.
I said
Então,
two.
mas podemos ir ali ver.
Não tem a ver com o tamanho. Tem a ver com...
For example, if we know
Tem-
that we have
Tem a ver com os tempos, com o tempo. Muita proporção também.
So how do you do it if you got a delay? From a practical standpoint, because people are starting their seedlings inside, and that's the structure we've got. So we were discussing this before with the seed blocks. What are they called?
Seed blocks.
Blocks. Everybody's heard of these things? These seed blocks. It's like this little metal thing, and you can
I can show you.
yeah, and you can basically make these little blocks of soil, and there's different sizes. So one's like a half centimeter, a centimeter, 3 centimeters, and 8 centimeters. So there's different sizes, and so you can take your potting soil, and what I suggest is you make a whole bunch of the small blocks first. Put your seeds in, every seed like you would do this if you want. You just don't have the plastic there around the edges, and you watch to see who germinates first. Whichever plants seeds germinate first are the ones with the better vigor and vitality. Those ones you block up immediately, you put them in the next size block. The ones that take time to germinate, those are the runts. Those are the ones that we're not going to realize a massive potential because of the low quality of seed to begin with, and so you cull them. You literally remove the ones that germinate slow because of the weaker seed. So you don't keep all the seedlings, right? When people are keeping pigs or cows, they cull the herd. They manage the herd for which ones are going to be the mothers based on the healthiest ones, right? The other ones you turn into bacon. Right? We don't think about that with our plants for some strange reason. I don't know, we just assume that all broccoli plants have the same vigor and vitality, or we just don't think about it. For some reason, we don't think about plants as we think about animals. If we understand that they're sentient beings, they go through life cycles, they're born, they get, hit puberty, they get pregnant, they have babies. Like if we understood the life cycles of plants and we envisioned the intuitive thing we know about animals and we just sort of like looked at plants that way, a lot of the stuff would be really, really simple. It's not complex, you don't need to study a lot of books. You just need to understand this is a sentient being and it's going through a life cycle phase. And you want to treat it as though you treat your children. If you haven't had children yet, maybe you don't have the privilege of that instinct that just comes and like guides you. But when you've got that, when you've got children and there's this like instinct about caring and protecting and keeping a bubble of love and light and safety and protection around them so they never experience pain and suffering, or you do the best you can, like if you can tune into that like sensation and you treat your plants that way, amazing things will happen. It's really quite exciting. Okay. Okay, enough. Good.
Now, Dan, I like if you can comment the differences between these plants and these ones, in the color and the well-being, everything. I think
So we'll
be
walk through
amazing
here.
for most of people.
Yeah.
Okay?
So I mean,
The difference between one and another.
I don't see the kind of color I want to see here, right? This doesn't. I don't see radiant, vibrant color here. You can see, yes, that's what is it, a cauliflower or what is it?
Yes, cauliflower.
Yeah. Okay, it's a cauliflower plant, but it doesn't have the kind of color I want. I mean, we can go look at the potting soil. We looked at it before. It's peat moss, cocoa coir, and NPK. It says NPK from animal sources. Probably that means bone meal, feather meal, and blood meal, which are all products of the industrial supply chain, which are soluble nutrients, which are, effectively don't require a microbiome to be digested. We won't even talk about the fact that the bone meal, blood meal, and feather meal came from animals that were fed conventional grain, might have had antibiotics, might have had glyphosate in them. And so just because it comes from an animal doesn't mean it didn't have all these other biochemical compounds in it as part of it, because that's what organic means these days, right? If you get chicken manure pellets, that's an organic fertilizer, that's not coming from chickens that were eating grass, much less organic grain. That's coming from chickens that were eating conventional grain, might have had antibiotics, might have had glyphosate, etc. right? The organic recommendation certification says if it's naturally occurring, it's approvable. And chicken manure is considered to be naturally occurring, even though it's unnatural for chickens to be in these massive industrial factory systems. So there's a slide here that says potting soil, and so it says besides compost, and I would suggest that a high quality compost would be a great base for your potting soil if you're going to be doing this. I've tried digging up soil from the ground and putting it in pots, and I can tell you, I don't know what it is, but soil likes to be in the ground. And when you put it in a piece of plastic, it just turns into something that doesn't work. So, yeah, so I have, besides compost, which would be your base, and peat or vermiculite or perlite, which helps maybe keep it having some aeration and structure, consider kelp, alfalfa meal, zeolite, humates, montmorillonite, lime, rock phosphate, gypsum, trace elements, inoculants, enzymes. There's a whole bunch of other goodies
To add in the
to add into the compost
compost. Okay.
that you use as your substrate. And I would suggest if you don't have open trays, which is what I use, the seedling blocks would be the thing to use. If it's too long, if it's for whatever reason the weather, et cetera, is making it so you can't plant when you want to, you simply make a larger block and you move those seedlings into the larger size block. So the roots can keep reaching out. You want the roots to be able to keep reaching out. Air pruning is pruning the roots. That's a boundary that the roots are reaching. That's inhibiting root growth. The reason the rice is so productive is because the roots never reached an edge. The reason your tomato plant is so productive is because the roots never reached an edge. It's unnatural for plants to be moved. It's not how plants evolved to have their roots inhibited, to have their, to be dug up, to be taken over here, to be twisted sideways. We don't think about how plants evolved to be. Think about transplanting fruit trees. Fruit trees is a total peeve of mine. It costs a ridiculous amount of money. Like, there's these things called seeds. Anybody heard of seeds? Like, we have apples. I'm not sure if you guys grow apples around here. Maybe the climate's not quite right, but we have apples where we make cider. Like, a lot of cider mash. Like, when you crush it up and you get the juice out, there's this mash. Like, if you just dug a trench and you drop the cider mash in the trench, you'd have a few thousand apple trees germinate. The ones that you like, you leave them. The rest of them, cut them off. If you want to ensure a specific variety, fine, graft in place. But you can put in 1,000 apple trees for basically free. Anybody that wants to establish perennial, polyculture, food forest, you're going to have way better vigor and vitality in these trees if you put the seeds in the ground and let them never reach an edge than if you spend €25 per sapling, which has a big top and a little bottom that probably got stuck into some salt fertilizer, NPK fertilizer in its pot. It costs 1,000 trees, that's tens of thousands of euro, right? That's real money. But if you wanted to establish a row of every 10 meters, a row of trees, I mean, you could establish these perennial polycultures extraordinarily inexpensively with plants that have a much better systemic function if you just did the nature thing and went back to the seeds. Peaches, nectarines, I don't know what your crops are. I mean, God forbid olives.
And then when we won't pick the seeds from some trees, but we don't know really if I will buy it in supermarket. We are in the same conversation. It's coming from some orchard which was treated.
So are there any trees anywhere in a 20-mile radius? Do you know anybody that's got trees?
And what about, because we learn like the genetics, blah blah blah, the seed will change a bit the genetics.
So if you want, you can graft. If you want to graft, go for it. But grafting is really easy, right? All you need is a little chunk of a branch from the tree you want. You cut the plant once it's germinated. You graft on that piece, and you can do what, 100 grafts in a morning. I mean, the actual cost to establish an orchard for anybody for whom money is a limiting factor. If you got more money than you need, go for it. Buy these traumatized plants and put them in. But if you don't have enough money to spend on that, then you do the nature thing. And in fact, I think the vigor and vitality will prove itself out over time, right?
Yeah. Let's go on.
So who sees a difference in color here?
I see. I can see.
Do you see a difference in color between there and here?
A lot of difference.
I'm thinking it's probably the same soil.
Yes, for sure.
Is the
Same
same.
procedure.
So I don't see, even though these are very close together, I don't see a spot where their roots are inhibited and they are turned in on themselves.
And
these, was
The
this
big
celery
difference-
or lettuce? Or sorry, or parsley?
No, no
Celery?
celery.
Celery.
big differences should be not be in a salt tray. No.
These look bigger,
Yeah. No, bigger on the
And
more
greener.
green
and
more
those look.
yellow, more
Isto é
healthy for.
francês, aquilo é
Yeah,
celinho.
but this
Experiment, experiment, experiment. Don't take my word for anything.
No.
I'm an American, why would you trust me? However you need to think about it, the point is that you experiment and you'll see, right? Hopefully your mind is open to these concepts. Now please, don't just do one thing. Spend the next 2 or 3 years experimenting. Invite all of your friends who are farmers to experiment. Go to each other's houses, take pictures, start WhatsApp groups. Like together we can learn, we can re-indigenize ourselves. We can actually develop these skill sets of what's more practical together very rapidly if we work together. If we, what's the word? Myceliate. If we establish the networks of energy flow and connection between each other, I would say this celery is far too close together. I would say, they maybe have germinated because they're still young, but actually they're all like, oh God, there's no way I can fill a celery head with this many people living close to me. So I broadcast my seed. I don't have trays that are this deep. I have my trays that are maybe that deep, and I'll put my seed fairly far apart in an open tray. I don't do cell blocks. I just do open trays that are about this size, that are made out of plastic like this. They're a little bit deeper than this, and I'll put my seeds, every couple inches. So I want them to be able to have space. I want them to germinate. I want to be able to pick them up out of the tray and put them into the ground. But yeah, I wouldn't put them this close together. And in general, yeah, if you're giving your plants more space, then you don't need so many seedlings to begin with. So, yeah. And that every time you're touching your plants, you're saying thank you, and when you're putting it in the ground, you're doing it with love and care and appreciation. There's a really important factor here, which is the X factor. Everything we've been talking about so far is the physical plane. Where does love come in? Where does intention come in? Where does prayer come in? I'm not saying we shake a stick around in circles and do a ceremony. I'm saying you with a feeling of sense of gratitude. Ideally you can sense it, not just think it, not just say the words. Okay, I got to remember this, these are the lines, this word, this word, this word. Not repeating the words, not thinking the words, but feeling the gratitude. The way I like to think of it is, we all choose our incarnations. I knew I was going to be human coming in this time, and this is I prepared for, I chose my parents, etc. This is the story I believe in. The pig that's born on a farm to a sow with a bunch of other piglets has a pretty good idea what the end game is when it chooses that incarnation. It knows it's going to end up in a slaughterhouse as bacon, and it's choosing that incarnation because it wants to provide food for you or some other people as an act of loving service. The opportunity is to give thanks and to provide that animal the best possible life it could have that it already chose. You don't need to feel bad about it. It chose its incarnation. It's not your job to feel bad. It's your job to give thanks. It's your job to bring gratitude and love and appreciation and to celebrate that gift of life. The same with an onion. That onion chose to be an onion. It chose its incarnation. It said, I want to build a body and have a life that then I can go to feed you and to be sustenance for you. If you have that feeling, if you have that thought, and before you plant the seed, you hold it in your hand and you say, thank you so much. And when every morning you come in, you say, hey guys, how's it going? Good to see you. Oh, you're so beautiful. If you feel it, you don't have to say it. The words get in the way. But if you have that experience of these are living beings who are choosing this incarnation, and you have this relationship which will last for the time it lasts, and the whole time you go through it, you engage a place of gratitude and appreciation and care. For me, all the rest of the trauma can get canceled out really fast, because love is more powerful than anything else. As far as I'm concerned, this is the X factor. We can talk about all the other things. We can talk about minerals. We can talk about air. We talk about water. But when we talk about love, as far as I'm concerned, that trumps everything else. So we're doing the best we can. The reality is you're doing the best you can with what you know. And feeling bad and feeling guilty, that's the worst thing for these guys. What you can do for them now is you can say, I love you, and thank you, and you're beautiful. That's the way to engage. Anybody got children? What's the way to treat children? Right? The more you hold that space, the more that's the way you engage. The safer they feel, the more they're able to relax into their full potential, and be vulnerable and flourish. Yeah? Anybody who's got kids? Just imagine these are your children, and treat them that way, and say nice words, and think good thoughts, and gently pet them, touch them lovingly. I don't know, how you want. So I wouldn't think it's a bad thing for me to hold that seedling. I would think, and practice, if anybody's got any kind of secret spiritual practices, like you meditate quietly when no one's looking, or you do anything like that, you want to practice your energy work, you learned Reiki, don't tell anybody, but you learned Reiki, you can practice doing Reiki with your plants. God forbid you sing, what? A song. All these things are completely real. Completely real.